Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Coming Back Stronger, Collaborative for Children's Response, Recovery, and Resilience Plan After Hurricane Harvey. My name is Holly Nett, and I'm the Community Resilience Manager on the Emergency Preparedness Team at Child Care Aware of America. Thank you for your interest in today's webinar. We all know that 2017 was a historical year of natural disasters, from major hurricanes, flooding, and devastating wildfires. Now in 2018, the devastation from disasters continues to impact childcare programs, most recently with Hurricane Michael's direct hit to the Florida Panhandle. For the good of families and young children that rely on stable early care and education in every community, childcare resource and referrals must be at the table before and after disasters to prioritize the unique needs of childcare providers. Today, we're going to learn from staff from Collaborative for Children, which is a Houston-based childcare resource and referral organization that's still in the midst of offering support to childcare programs impacted by Hurricane Harvey. We hope that you can learn from their experience to better prepare your organization for post-disaster response. Before we get started, I want to direct you to our website, which is childcareprepare.org, where you can find a lot of tools and resources to help you with emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. On this webpage, you can find archived webinars from the past year, as well as information to deal with disasters that you may have in your area. You can also sign up to receive a monthly newsletter from the staff at Child Care Aware of America. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted at our website, childcareprepare.org, within 1 week. All participant lines are muted, but we encourage you to type a comment or a question in the question box that you should see on your panel. We'll allow time at the completion of the presentation for a question and answer period. Let's meet today's presenters. We have 3 staff members from Collaborative for Children in Houston with us today. First is Jerry Kenny, who is the Director of Response and Recovery. As the Director of Disaster Response and Recovery at Collaborative for Children, Jerry is focused on restoring high-quality early childhood education and care across the Gulf Coast region. Jerry has 10 years of professional experience concentrating on education, food security, institutional fragility, and capacity building, as well as program development and evaluation. He has experience in the Peace Corps, being a volunteer in Armenia, as well as significant work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, South Africa, and South Sudan. Jerry's earned a Master's of International Affairs from the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University and holds a BA from Austin College. We also have Melitza Mesquita. Melitza is the Lead Response and Recovery Coordinator for Collaborative for Children. Since 2008, she has served in that role. A native Californian, Melitza graduated from the California State University with a bachelor's degree in sociology with an emphasis on family studies. Her career as a social worker began when she moved to Houston, Texas in 2011 and became the director of a child care center in Clear Lake. In 2015, she completed her master's degree in sociology and was recruited to become the program director of a foster and adoption agency in Galveston. There, she oversaw local and regional case managers. She is a dedicated social worker and has a passion for serving vulnerable populations, assisting with disaster case management, and serving and seeing the quality improvement of child care centers across Texas. Next, we have Mitzi Harrison, who's been the Response and Recovery Coordinator for Collaborative for Children since January of 2018. Mitzi graduated from Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi, with a bachelor's in elementary ed and a master's in curriculum and instruction. Her previous employment consists of educating students in Mississippi and Louisiana public and charter school districts. Her stint in the classroom covers grades pre-K through high school. She's also served as a curriculum and instruction specialist. She's extremely passionate about education and enjoys her new role at Collaborative for Children, assisting child care centers recovering from disasters and devastation. She's elated to share that she has 20 years of service in education. To set the stage today, we'd like to start by showing you a brief 2-minute video clip. The video in its entirety can be found on Collaborative for Children's website.
Hi, thank you very much for the introduction, Holly, and we appreciate the opportunity to present the work we're doing after Hurricane Harvey. We appreciate the partnership with Child Care&Rs. We know that every disaster presents unique challenges. Every disaster is unique in its own way and presents demands on behalf of those that are affected that are different in every experience. But for us, we feel like what we're sharing today is our story, but every story has similar elements. And we hope that what we're sharing today is useful for those across the country that are working in the post-disaster space and preparing for future disasters. So for those of you across the country working in areas that have been hit, thank you for your work. And please know that we're more than willing to reach out and help you through the process as much as possible and share further details about our. So our story isn't finished yet. We're still assessing need and we're still trying to solve problems related to childcare providers that were damaged by Harvey. We feel like your feedback will make our program stronger, and we hope that some of the elements that we're presenting today will be useful in your post-disaster response and recovery and preparedness work as well. When we're successful, we feel like we'll accomplish 3 things. We want to cover the operational management and the on-the-ground demands that we've faced in the post-disaster period. Secondly, we want to present possible approaches that we've used to resolve these dilemmas and address these demands that have been effective for our purposes in the year after Hurricane Harvey. And then third, we really want to open a dialogue with those that are working in this space to promote ongoing problem solving and future collaboration to improve the effectiveness of the work, particularly of child care resource and referral agencies in this space. First, I'd like to start out with the mission and the vision of Collaborative for Children. We, for 30 years, we've been working to improve the quality of early childhood education by working with those who are most influential in the lives of young children. Our vision is for all children in Greater Houston to have the high quality early learning opportunities they need to achieve their full potential. So we felt like Hurricane Harvey and the damage it inflicted is a direct threat to our vision. If children don't have early learning spaces to go to, if those early learning spaces have been devastated by flooding events, then obviously we can't achieve our vision at Collaborative for Children. Major program areas. Those program areas include early education quality improvement, including our Institute for Early Learning, which combines online as well as group face-to-face trainings. We manage Texas Rising Star, which is a quality rating for our, across the state of Texas. We manage Texas Rising Star for our region, including assessments and consultants for child care providers on subsidy who want to improve their programs. We also have family engagement programs, including the Find Child Care Now, parent navigation, online portal, as well as a call center to assist families with finding high quality childcare. We manage Parents as Teachers national curriculum programs, family-centered childcare project, as well as integrated early learning models, including our flagship program, College Bound from Birth, which combines quality improvement work with childcare providers, intensive quality improvement work with childcare providers, as well as family engagement work to dramatically improve the quality of early childhood education, particularly in low-income communities. We also advocate for policy changes that improve access for all families to high quality early education and care. So at the end of August last year, our staff was dedicated to implementing our ongoing quality improvement and family engagement programs. Part of living on the Gulf Coast is constantly during hurricane season monitoring the development of potential storms in the Gulf of Mexico. Harvey was similar to that. We heard the reports that the level of rainfall could be unprecedented. Certainly you hear several warnings throughout the year. I don't think many people anticipated that we would see the levels that we saw. So when Harvey hit the weekend of August 25th, our first efforts revolved around securing, making sure the safety and security of our staff was in place, everybody taking care of their families, and then making sure we had organizational continuity, remote working, things like that. Immediately, we realized that this was an unprecedented level of damage. So we saw, like everyone else on the televisions, that families were being evacuated from their homes and were in major shelters such as the George R. Brown Convention Center. Staff that were able to get to those shelters helped set up early learning spaces, spaces for children to go to while their families worked out their specific needs in the early days of the storm. So it was about a week of continual flooding for Harvey. I'm going to link to a timeline that we use for phase one to give you a sense of what we accomplished in the early days after Harvey. So immediately after the storm, Harvey made landfall on August 25th. Our approach focused on three key areas. The first step was assessment, because we know that in the immediate aftermath of a storm, there's key needs and gaps that emerge. The first need and the first big gap is information. How many child care centers were affected? How is this affecting the families? And so our first step was to collect that key information. So by August 30th, that was the rains were continuing to come down on August 30th. We were sending out initial surveys to child care centers in our region. Those were largely via email. By mid-September, as we continued to collect information, we knew that the damage was unprecedented, and this was a threat to destabilize our entire early education network. So we began on-site assessments with staff and volunteers to go out to those centers that had been most devastated and see how bad the damage was. Another key piece after assessment was data. The data we collected drove our connection to key partners in this space. So Save the Children was a key partner who arrived on the scene, as well as Child Care Aware of America. And based on the data we were collecting, we began to create programs that would help address these needs, which led us to the third key area, which was organization, identifying the priorities and developing a plan. So the connection between those things, assessing, connecting with partners in the space, and organizing a plan, which is when we developed the multi-phase plan that we're currently using. Those were our three post-disaster priorities. So if you look at the results, once we had assessed the damage, developed a plan, and began working with partners, by the end of 2017, we collected over 1,100 surveys, and we were able to get assistance in the form of equipment and material vouchers in the hands of over 150 childcare providers, roughly $450,000 to those providers to help them kickstart a recovery effort. Those providers served over 9,000 children. Moving forward, I'm going to talk about 5 dilemmas. And when we're thinking through what would be useful for others that are interested, particularly at a CCR&R level, what were the key dilemmas that we faced at Collaborate for Children in the aftermath of Harvey? And we want to present these to begin to lay out what are the sort of things you're going to deal with in the post-disaster period. And I'm sure some that are joining on the call that have been hit in Florida as well as in the Carolinas are dealing with some of these dilemmas now. So the first dilemma is, across the 13-county Greater Houston area, with more than 4,200 childcare providers, home and center-based providers in our region, and a metro area that's more diverse and larger than many states, how do we assess need? Just thinking that there's no staff, there's no survey instruments that we have available, how do we begin to assess need? And what we did was focus on two principles. What is the absolute essential data that we need to move forward? So it had to be actionable data. And we defined actionable data as what do we need to make a decision to get assistance into the hands of childcare providers. The second principle was this needed to be the least burdensome, easiest, most accessible data collection method possible. So what we developed and what I'm linking to is the live rapid electronic assessment. So this survey feeds into what I was saying on prioritizing damage of those centers across our network. So we wanted to identify how many children are affected in a particular center and what is the relative level of damage. So this survey instrument collects data on location, primary language, so we make sure that we have the staff to interact with the providers. The licensing number is the unique identifier once the providers are in our system. And then it focuses specifically on the number of children served at the different centers. So we want to look at how many children were enrolled prior to Harvey, and then how many children are currently enrolled, so we see where that gap is in their capacity and their existing services. Additionally, we added a subjective measure of their sense of recovery, so we could prioritize based on those who felt like they weren't recovered at all, so we could kickstart those specifically, as well as estimates of damage, both total damage as well as damage to classroom and outdoor equipment materials. That was our rapid electronic assessment. It takes less than 10 minutes on average for the childcare providers to complete it, and that links them into our large database of providers. That's how they enter the system. We used our call center to reach out to the providers to help them fill out the form. And additionally, later on down the road, once we connected with the providers and assigned them a coordinator, we also developed a much more comprehensive on-site damage assessment. This graph just presents the trends that we track to look at how many providers have entered our recovery system. You'll see it begins in mid-November, and you'll see us enter our system based on the data we collected then. And then you'll see spikes in February as well as spikes in July. And then you'll see it tail off in the beginning of September when we ended outreach efforts. So where we conducted intensive outreach, you'll see spikes, and that's what we use to track to make sure we're trending in the right directions when we do outreach. The second dilemma I'll mention is how we built a response and recovery team. As I mentioned, response and recovery was not a key component of our traditional programs at Collaborative for Children. And I'll mention just briefly the different positions and the roles they play on our team. So the director is my position that deals at the strategic level with oversight, planning, long-term planning, as well as liaising with donors and others to make sure we're on track. We have a lead response and recovery coordinator manager who at the operational level executes our plans, brings a case management expertise and skills as well as early education background, and is really focused on problem solving from at the coordinator level. Both she's in the middle, directing the strategic, implementing the strategic level, and dealing with the on-the-ground level that comes from the coordinators. We have 4 response and recovery coordinators. Those are a direct link to providers. They advocate for providers' needs and help the providers navigate the recovery process. We also have a unique position, which is a vulnerable populations outreach coordinator. Their primary role is to make sure that no provider is left out or left behind in our recovery process because for whatever reason that emerges, they can't access our recovery assistance. And to make sure that our recovery process is inclusive. We also rely heavily on data management and evaluation. We have a data management, evaluation, and learning lead that he checks our data structure, our data collection methods, is internal quality control of our data. And it's really an independent technical problem solver to answer questions about, can we answer specific questions based on the data that we have? What data do we need to collect to answer these questions? and how can we better understand what's happening as the recovery process moves forward. We have a key program coordinator that works across these roles to fill any gaps, make sure everything flows and things are linked together. And then across these other support roles, we have finance to verify reimbursement, receipts, qualify to make sure our different funding streams are braided together and we're tracking funding levels. We have a training lead to make sure our online and face-to-face trainings are appropriate and relevant to the needs of the childcare providers. We have a communications lead to make sure we're working with stakeholders across the region and communicating the needs as well as the effectiveness of our recovery efforts. Advocacy and policy lead to work in local working groups and at the state level to advocate for the needs of childcare providers. And then development leads to work with our donors and make sure that if we have resource needs, we meet those needs so we can have an effective response program. We also finally have specialized contractors and interns largely focused on meeting the specific language needs of our childcare providers. Vietnamese and Spanish were two areas we really had to find those who spoke and could reach out to childcare providers in those populations so they weren't left out of our process. The third dilemma I'll mention is how to balance immediate relief with customized support. So over time, we developed an iterative multi-step recovery process, and that recovery process is presented here. So childcare providers, we were able to get all of our multi-step recovery process on one page, which was very important in us reaching out to childcare providers and making sure we're transparent about our process and what the different steps are. So you'll see that it starts with initially contacting us via email or phone. It then goes to the rapid assessment form that I presented previously. That gets them into our system. We then, based on key learnings of previous responses, we open access to a course on the Institute for Early Learning on how to create high quality early learning spaces. Once the childcare providers develop a basic knowledge and skills about how to set up the spaces, we connect them to equipment and material vouchers to really kickstart the recovery process. And based on feedback from providers, this step 4 is key. Even though the equipment material voucher is not sufficient to cover all their needs, it does develop hope in providers and that we are coming back and you will be connected with an organization that cares about your needs and will follow up with you via site visits. But that initial equipment and material voucher is critical for developing hope in childcare providers that they can come back from this, from the damage inflicted by the disaster. So once they receive the equipment and material voucher, each provider in our system gets a site visit. Based on the information collected on the site visit assessment form, they then develop a customized recovery plan. So every childcare provider in our system is working on an individual recovery plan that they develop with their coordinator. Based on that plan, they can access additional equipment material vouchers as well as access reimbursable recovery assistance, because in our experience, childcare providers are not waiting for either federal dollars or other dollars to come down the system. They're as quickly as possible, they're getting back on their feet. And for those that had out-of-pocket expenses, they took risky loans, they dipped into savings, they did a lot of things to restart their childcare operations. We reimburse those receipts that qualify. Additionally, we're working on where we're at step 7 is where we are now, linking them to our ongoing quality rating and improvement system and looking at how do we build their resilience to future disasters. So as much as possible, cut through the red tape, explain the process, and ultimately trust is key with the providers, and we trust our providers based on what they tell us and the site visits to verify their damage. Looking at our multi-step process, I'll just present a few of the trends that we look at to see where we are in the recovery process. So you'll see here, these are unique providers that have received financial assistance. So you'll see, again, beginning mid-November, a surge in providers getting assistance. And once we had the process up and going, it's largely been relatively steady. And we're now in close to 500 providers that have received financial assistance. This trend is on-site damage assessments. This happens later in the process, as a later step. So you'll see again in mid-November, how this is sort of lagged behind the others because first they receive the vouchers, then they receive the damage assessments, but these are on-site face-to-face damage assessments. These are providers that signed individual recovery plans. So again, this is a later step in the process. So this is after they've received an initial voucher, they've gotten a site visit, they then develop an individual customized plan with our coordinators. And then finally, and a key piece is working with partners that know there's a lot of questions regarding need in the post-disaster period. We were able to work with Save the Children and others and flexible funding mechanisms where we communicated the need as it emerged. So many thought in terms of an early education response, $1 million might be a lot, or could we get $1 million out into the hands of providers? We surged past that beginning early of this year and have just continued based on need to see high dollar amounts that are needed by providers in our region. The fourth dilemma is how do we ensure an inclusive recovery? Houston is the most diverse metro area in the US. Recovery really should be inclusive, reflecting these local demographics. And as we're building all of these, how do we make sure that childcare providers in our region can access it? And we had to develop the site visit surveys, we had to develop all these templates, and it's easy to lose track of who you're serving as you're developing all of these things. So we came back and said, let's question ourselves on whether or not this is as accessible as we think it is and make sure that it is. And I just want to show you really quickly how we use mapping in our system to track who's in our recovery process and at what level they are. So if you'll see here, this is a map of the greater Houston area. And I'll just cover a few things on how we've used these mapping exercises. The blue map overlay is socioeconomic status. So we looked at socioeconomic status. Those deeper blue areas are lower based on income, education, health access. So those are really areas that are vulnerable populations. So we concentrated on those providers that are serving vulnerable populations. If you look at the other red dots, those are FEMA-based flood layers. And so we looked at where do those two overlap, low socioeconomic status and FEMA flood damage. So in addition to that, we define vulnerability both by the outreach to those 26 most vulnerable zip codes. We also defined it as those serving low-income families via subsidy, those serving children with special needs, those serving infants, those with limited English language capabilities, and those with technological barriers to access our recovery. I'll say most of the providers in our system meet multiple factors for vulnerability, and one of our key outreach efforts was by September 1st to reach 100% of the providers in the 26 most vulnerable zip codes based on flooding and socioeconomic status. There were 463 childcare providers in those 26 zip codes, and we had an effort, a cascading effort based on initial emails. Then we reached out via phone calls, and finally we reached out via cold site visits, really to make sure by the end of this process we could say, we are confident we left nobody behind, that we didn't leave anybody out of our effort. We really tried to target those that were most vulnerable. One interesting stat is that 10% of those 463 providers in the 26 zip codes are closed between April and September, indicating the effect of the damage. That represents over 1,700 seats. And finally, how do we link the immediate relief to long-term resilience and quality improvement? And this is really where we are moving into phase 3. So the worst case scenario is that childcare providers will slide back into the fold and be at the state that they were prior to the storm, and we're really trying to avoid that. So one thing we're doing is linking them to Texas Rising Stars so they continue to get access to our training and continue to get access to our quality improvement efforts, as well as subsidy for childcare for children in their care. So one thing we must continue to do is address their key challenges as we have during the immediate recovery period, but they're ongoing challenges because we know the disaster recovery isn't over after a year. It continues even up to a decade. So we're really trying to think through how do we make them more resilient as a network. So with those 5 dilemmas, I will now pass it to Melissa to cover really a day in the life at the level of our manager for response and recovery.
Thank you, Gary. So as the lead coordinator for the program, my main role is to really bring continuity and provide a case management perspective. So something I did coming into the program was the team meets Mondays and Fridays to discuss operational challenges, stories, and to debrief. Additionally, we implemented 3 days of field work. And in that field work, they are meeting providers where these providers need to be met. So they're out in the community meeting the needs 3 days a week. And at any given time, these coordinators are reaching 10 to 14 childcare centers or registered homes per day. So next slide here we have is the entire map of Houston. Houston is approximately 4.7 million people. You could fit the state of New Jersey and Rhode Island. So we had a big challenge in trying to figure out how to meet everyone's needs with a small team. So what we did was divided the map into 4 quadrants. We have our northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast side. And this allowed the team to be in their area closest to their home and also be able to serve certain areas more efficiently. So originally you were having your team drive 2-3 hours to one site and then drive 2-3 hours back home, which wasn't efficient. So splitting it this way geographically for Houston made the most sense. And so my main job, additionally to the case management perspective, is to approve the individual recovery plans. And that is always just a part of our weekly meetings on Mondays and Fridays. And also continuous quality improvement, standardizing the program as a whole. Our coordinators have an average of 50 to 60 providers at any one time. So we have pretty massive caseloads. So that kind of ties into them being remote or in the field 3 days a week, to give them the opportunity to break up their work week and also to serve our community more efficiently. Some of my roles in the office include approving these plans, confirming their licensing eligibility for equipment and material vouchers, discussing reimbursements if we have a situation where a provider may feel that they need to be reimbursed for something that we may not approve. So we really do talk it out on our time and our meetings, just meeting every provider and really discussing how we can meet these providers on an individual basis. Our motto is, no case is the same. So we really do take into consideration different barriers when we discuss our providers. Additionally, we were able to hire 2 part-time interns, one Vietnamese speaking, one Spanish speaking, and they were going out into the community with our coordinators to provide language assistance. Additionally, when we have a language barrier, they can help these providers order their materials and equipment. Okay, and managing the vulnerable populations outreach was very fun this summer. The team is very competitive with one another, so we made it fun. We knew we had a goal to meet, and so we put a big board up in my office and everyone was in charge of hitting a certain goal. And every week they were just crossing off who they were hitting, and as I said earlier, they were going to anywhere from 10 to 14 providers in one day. Trying to get people into our program, letting them know that if they had any flood damage that we were here to help them. So it started with contacting them via email, then phone, and then what we deemed a cold site visit, just door-to-door knocking, identifying ourselves with appropriate t-shirts and our business cards, letting them know, hey, we are here to help. And additionally, we did have our interns providing those language services to get providers to open the door for us. And so as the program lead, the role that I have really has to be adaptable, has to be ready to make quick on-the-spot decisions, and really apply a case management perspective, as no day is the same, no child care center is the same. And so as my role is to really just meet with the coordinators, talk about their cases, and to let them know that there is support for these providers. So that is what my main role is. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mitzi Harrison.
Thank you, Melissa. My name is Mitzi Harrison, and I am a response and recovery coordinator here at Collaborative, as stated earlier. I'm going to just go have a little overview about what I do here for the center, well, for Collaborative. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about my role as the coordinator. I am the direct contact for the provider. I am the person that they are, my team also, we're the people who they contact immediately after filling out the rapid electronic assessment. And that's the thing that they fill out, the survey that they fill out in order to enter our program. And so once they fill that out and we know a little general overview of their needs and assessments, we normally do a licensing check, and that we do through the Department of Family and Protective Services. And we also have a website for Collaborative for those who are currently in the program. And what we do is we go see if they have any deficiencies. And that also provides a leeway for us to understand what type of center we are going into. Prior to going to the center, we know their deficiencies, what they're lacking, what kind of things they, we need to focus on in improving, and that would help us also later on when they're placing their orders to better understand the needs of the center. We verify a course completion certificate, and that is through the Texas A&M Agri-Life Extension. Collaborative have partnered with Texas A&M to provide some trainings online. So we send a link out in our initial email, and it has the link for them to go on and do the course, and the course is actually free of charge. All we ask them to do is to take the course and send us a copy of the certificate to our email provided through the email that we send to them. I approve equipment and materials vouchers. Once the voucher has been sent out to them, they actually place their order. I am the first approval, so therefore I look at everything that they order, things that we talked about at our site visit and things like that. Then I send it over to Melissa to be approved, and then the equipment and materials order is then processed and sent out. We connect with providers and schedule a site visit. This is done immediately following the rapid electronic assessment form. We like to go out and do the site visit as soon as we can. We try to do this within 7 days of them entering our program. So we reach out, we do early morning visits, we do late evening visits. It all depends on the center and what their need is. Sometimes they can't always do morning visits, so we're very adaptable. Our job, we have to be flexible. Things change in a moment's notice, so our team have to be very flexible with just about everything, from talking to providers to coming into the office, to the way we process things, because when things arise, of course, you have to rethink and strategize and come back and try to find another plan that's going to work for us. The next slide that we're going to talk about is a week in life of the response coordinator in the aspect of the site visit, and that's when we actually go out to the center. We take a tour of the child care facility to complete the site visit survey, and it's another survey that we implement, and we put all of the information into the system. Once we sit down and talk with the child care providers, we listen to their stories. Sometimes our site visits are 45 minutes, sometimes they're an hour and a half, depending on the need of the center. So we like to listen to their stories to better identify the challenges and the needs of the center. We take and collect pictures to support the damaged assessments. So sometimes our providers already have taken pictures prior to us getting there, so they have the most efficient pictures. A lot of times it's following the hurricane, they have those pictures that impact us the most because they have the right after the damaged pictures. with the provider, we complete the individual recovery plan and process additional vouchers. So we talk to them, and if the first voucher did not complete their needs, sometimes they have a destroyed playground and the first initial voucher was not able to cover that, and we're able to go forth and maybe get things that they may need to have an effective playground to meet licensing standards. We encourage the providers to pursue certification in Texas Rising Star. This is a question that we ask on the individual recovery plan. And we also come out once we, at the site visit, we have the information to actually have the process started. The initial process started at the site visit. So then all we do is come back and we return those into our Texas Rising Star team here at Collaborative. So it's teamwork across the board, not only just with our team, but throughout the the Collaborative. So frequently asked questions that our providers have for us are there any training provided to the child care providers? We do provide free online trainings and monthly face-to-face trainings. So on Saturdays, we do come in from 7:30 to 12 o'clock, but the training is actually from 9 to 12. And we have presenters here with trainings, and they leave with their certificate showing that their training hours have been completed for that particular training. The next question is, does the provider keep the equipment and materials acquired through the vouchers? And the answer is yes. After confirming the need and signing the IRP, which is the individual recovery plan, they are able to keep the belongings and the materials for them, at their centers. It's no longer our property, it's theirs. We just ask that, they educate the kids and do the best that they can. What we have thought about and we talked about is making sure, in our next phase that they're able to find ways to preserve those things, because these are really good quality materials that has been provided to them. So that's our next phase, is being able for them to keep the belongings once it's obtained. What other assistance can we provide? We will be revisiting all child care providers that we have seen in 2017 and 18 in 2019 to assess the ongoing challenges and needs, because believe it or not, there are still some centers out there still with needs even a year following Harvey. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Melissa and Mitzi. And I'll just present one additional slide regarding our recovery process. A key to our response and recovery process after Harvey has been tracking our progress over key indicators. So we have multiple phases, and we have objectives that are tied to the phases, outcomes that are tied, as well as metrics. So we have a response and recovery dashboard. This is the phase 2 dashboard that we're using. This dashboard is updated every week. And the dashboard includes the metrics that we're using to evaluate whether or not we're achieving the results we'd like to achieve for our region. So key metrics are the number of providers we've assessed. That gets updated each week. So where we are right now, we've assessed over half of all the providers in our 13-county region. We've done hundreds of trainings, hundreds of on-site assessments. Additionally, for metric 2.4, we're at 473 childcare, home, or center-based providers that have gotten some form of financial assistance. That could be equipment, material vouchers, and or reimbursements. That represents over 26,000 children. So we track that as well for seeing how large of an impact we're having on the children of our region. And right now, that assistance equals about $3.3 million. So this is a really large response and recovery effort. Additionally, we're tracking on outcome 3, the number of individual recovery plans that have been developed. And then as we move forward to linking the providers to Texas Rising Star, we're tracking the number of TRS interest forms. And in phase 3, we'll be looking at how many of the providers in our network that were not Texas Rising Star certified are beginning to move in that direction to build the resilience. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have some metrics, because it is so chaotic in the post-disaster period, and you want to put some metrics and indicators out to make sure you're tracking your progress and that everyone's moving in the right direction towards the same goals. Finally, I'll just mention where we're headed. In 2017, Harvey was the third 500-year flood in the past 3 years. We had 500-year floods in 2015 in Houston, 2016 in Houston, and Harvey was just unprecedented. Additionally, we've recently found out, even though 2018 has not been a high flood year, some of the providers that were damaged in Harvey that got assistance to get back on their feet flooded again, even with the rains we had this year. So this isn't going away. This is going to be something that our region deals with and others across the country and across the world deal with. And really the only option we have is to find solutions. And the disasters always disproportionately impact the most vulnerable. So we have to make sure our solutions are inclusive and they reach out to those that are most vulnerable in our communities. So with that, I'll just move it forward to questions.
Thank you, Jerry, Melissa, and Missy. The child care providers and children and families that they serve are certainly in a better place due to all of your efforts. So Child Care Aware of America really wants to commend you on being a leader in this disaster recovery work. We do have some questions that have come in, and I encourage all of you, if you have a question, to go ahead and type those in, and we'll answer as many as we have time for. One of the questions that came in is, are you finding that there are some unmet training needs for providers still 1 year later?
Yes, and I'll just open it up and I'll pass it to our colleagues who have some responses. Yes, the training needs are key, and based on feedback from our quality improvement staff and our training specialists here at Collaborative for Children, adding that initial course on our Institute for Early Learning was a key piece of our process, because it really sets a foundation of high quality knowledge, high quality skills, that when they get these new equipment and material vouchers, they're able to set up a high quality classroom so that it's consistent with our goal to build back better, so come back stronger than before the storm. So combining the high quality equipment with high quality training has been key. Additionally, our training staff has recently developed a trauma-informed care online course. So it's that combination for a region our size, it's that combination of online courses that people that are remote or others that aren't able to come to face-to-face trainings can access, with the face-to-face trainings that complement either those that would rather attend a face-to-face training, or technologically they're not comfortable with taking a course online. So we really feel like there's a sweet spot with making sure we have both online courses developed and available and accessible, as well as face-to-face. And we've needed both of those, both in terms of setting up high quality spaces, trauma-informed care, and moving forward, emergency preparedness. And that's what we're going to flush out moving into 2019.
So in late October, a couple weeks ago, we hosted an emergency preparedness Saturday training, and our providers that came to the training had already received material and equipment vouchers, reimbursements, and the common theme when they were walking out of their training was they didn't realize, still a year after Harvey, after receiving materials and equipment, they felt that they were still not prepared if another disaster would hit. So we are definitely for 2019 going to make sure that each of our providers has a foundation of emergency preparedness for not only themselves, their staff, the children in their center, but as a business as a whole.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Another question is there a cap amount per provider for vouchers or reimbursements?
Yes, and that's a really good question, and that's something we constantly try to balance, because of course the funding levels are not inexhaustible. We have limited funding, and we, particularly in the immediate post-disaster period, we didn't know how much need was out there. So we used what we call a voucher rubric. So it's a table that on the x-axis would include how many children are served, and on the y-axis would include the level of damage. And we assigned dollar amounts or max levels of assistance within those grids. So if we have funding available, certainly we want to provide as much as possible and get it out as quickly as possible. But you also have to balance that with the risks of not getting a lot of money out into the hands of providers before doing on-site assessments, because each provider, of course, our limit is $20,000 per provider. So that's a combination of multiple vouchers and reimbursements. So we try to get an initial voucher to sort of kickstart the recovery process. We usually cap that at no more than $5,000. They come back with, once we do the individual recovery plan after a site visit, after the site visit survey, and we develop the individual recovery plan. Based on that plan, we'll then go up to 10,000 or more additional vouchers, or we will cut them a reimbursement check based on qualifying receipts. So we are constantly tweaking those voucher levels and balancing the initial risk of giving out vouchers prior to doing site visits with making sure we have enough resources available following the site visit to fulfill the needs that they have in the individual recovery plan.
Thank you, Jerry. I think we have time for one more question, and there's a question here. How long did you wait before you started doing damage assessments? And how long were the assessments conducted, like for what period of time? And any recommendations to other CCR&Rs if they encounter this as far as a timeline?
Sure. So we started the assessments as the flood was still happening. The rain was still coming down, and we were trying to send out emails with initial assessments. We've since tweaked those initial assessments and created the rapid assessment form, which we shared on the webinar today. But that form continues to be available and it's live today. We are still getting each week a few providers entering our system once they're referred from other providers who realize the process was real and that it actually provides assistance. So that continues to be live. We want to make sure no one's left behind. So all of our assessment forms, we started immediately in the first week after the storm, and they continue to be open today. And Holly, what was your other part of that question?
Recommendations to other CCR&Rs if they're encountering that damage assessment process.
Great. I would really recommend, based on the most common disasters in your area, identifying some really quick assessment tools that you develop pre-disaster to deploy in the case of disaster. So certainly we have flooding events are the major risk to our region. So we have this rapid assessment form ready to go in the event of an additional disaster. So what we're really thinking through is, how do we cut what took us months and after Harvey, how do we cut that down to weeks? And what took us weeks, how do we cut it down to days? And then what took us days, how do we cut it down to hours? So if we have all of these assessment forms ready to go, and we know how we're going to use that data to get assistance in the hands of providers as quickly as possible, we have our relationships with vendors like Lakeshore and Kaplan set up. We have our partnerships with those like Save the Children and Child Care Aware set up. We're really thinking through, how do we deploy a model as quickly as possible that includes all of these things flushed out, because it's not a matter of if another storm's going to hit, it's just when it's going to hit, and we need to be more prepared.
Thank you. And with that, I think it's a good transition into our next slide, which again sends a reminder to all of you about the resources that we have available at Child Care Aware of America. So Jerry and his team talk about the damage assessments, becoming familiar with what's available. We do have some sample damage assessments available at our office, and would be very interested in talking to you about how those could roll out and who your key partners are in your state, to make sure that you're not having a lot of duplication when it comes time to doing those damage assessments. Know that we have a lot of other resources on our website as well. There's a lot of preparedness resources, as well as response and recovery resources, so feel free to check it out. I did want to put another plug in before we end for the video. The entire video is less than 10 minutes in length. Really encourage you to check it out. And you can find that video on Collaborative for Children's website, which is collabforchildren.org. And we hope that you found this information to be very, very helpful and gives you some things to think about in advance of something happening in your area. So once again, I want to thank Jerry, Melissa, and Mitzi for their time today, for all the efforts that they've been doing with the providers in their area. It is wonderful what you're offering to them, and I wish you continued success with it. So with that, we want to thank all of you for your participation today. And for more information, check our website. We'll have this recording available within a week. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.